Welcome to the show, Education in the Community. I am your host, Reverend Robert L. McKnight. We have a very exciting show, I promise you. All of our shows are exciting, but especially this one. We're interviewing Miss Ricky Stevens, and we're going to have a conversation with her about Black Paris tours. Join us, get your passport, travel with us vicariously as we explore the city of Paris. Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you, Reverend McKnight.
It's exciting. I can hardly wait to find out more. We had an opportunity to speak briefly before the show. And I know that you told me you're a native of Oakland.
Oakland, California, born right here. I won't tell you when, but born right here at Oak Knoll Naval Hospital. So anyone who knows the area will know about what time that was. My family, the Stevensons, are from Oklahoma. And some of that history of our family is what set me off to find out more about who we are as African Americans in the world.
Oh, that's interesting. And so not only are you there as a tourist, but you're also there as a student. There was a film out called Sankofa. And so you're doing Sankofa, you're going back to get the essence of that history, that experience, because you'll be celebrating, or you are celebrating this year, two historical events.
Yes.
One is the 20th year for Black Paris tours.
Yes.
And secondly, it's the centennial, the 100-year recognition, celebration of Africans traveling to Paris.
McKnight. Well, in 1996, I had been in Bay Area media. I was in television. I was working for Channel 4. Wow. I had been a travel reporter working for a San Francisco-based network. I had been a business reporter working for a Silicon Valley television network. And let me take this back. It goes back to my birth, actually. My mother, who was from Denver, Colorado, married my father, who was from Oklahoma. They both met, well, they met in San Francisco during right after, I guess, World War II. And my dad, I guess when he proposed to my mother, he said, if you marry me and we have children, we will go and live in Paris. My mother had been a professional dancer. She'd learned to dance, in fact, at the Denver Y. And she went out to the world, a child of the Depression, as a professional dancer. And so she was in different places. You know, your mother doesn't tell you everything. But Mom had these wonderful stories of the people that she had met, and she knew Rochester, and we knew of Louis Armstrong. And when I was 3, my mother took me from actually we went from San Diego. Every Navy family has to live in San Diego, and we went from San Diego to Los Angeles, and I got to see Josephine Baker perform for the first time when I was 3.
In Los Angeles?
In Los Angeles. And that was significant because that was during a time when African American performers could not perform in every city. It was still in the 50s, segregation. And Josephine Baker was a kind of woman, a determined Black American woman who said she would not perform in any city where Blacks could not go to the theaters as fully participating audience members or stay in hotels. So this was an act of supporting a Black woman who was one of the pioneers in the civil rights movement. So I remember that as a 3-year-old. I can remember watching her. She brought her rainbow tribe of 12 children onto the stage, and I was like, wow, as a 3-year-old. Well, then later, when I was 10, my parents took us to see all these different entertainers who would perform in San Francisco, and I saw her again. I got to meet James Baldwin when I was 10. My parents, when Dad got out of the Navy, they settled in a town called East Palo Alto. And you may know of that because it was at one time called Nairobi, a very proud Black community. We had amazing teachers. And I took French in high school. But I had decided when I was a little girl that I was going to go and live in Paris. Well, my father, in his wisdom, when he retired from the Navy, he said, the children have lived all over. We lived in a bunch we lived on a bunch of Navy bases. And he said, well, let's settle down. They bought this house in East Palo Alto, so we did not go. That was one of my mother's greatest sorrows. But I said, when I grow up, I'm going. So the other thing I wanted to do was I wanted to be a journalist, to tell our side of the story. And so having followed women like Belva Davis, Jerry Land, Dr. Carlton Goodlett, when I was a little girl, we sold his newspaper, the Sun Reporter.
Sun Reporter.
We sold it on corners. My brother and I sold that newspaper. And it's knowledge of who we are that would fuel my desire to, one, become a journalist, to tell our side of the story. Anything that happened in East Palo Alto, it would always be thugs riot. Well, right across the freeway in Atherton, one of the most prosperous, affluent communities in the United States, if the same thing happened, would be, oh, spring hijinks. And those children just have so much exuberance, they don't know what to do with themselves. So I was determined that I was going to fight these stereotypes about who we are. So I said in my mind, I would become a journalist, I was going to work in New York, and I would eventually live in New York. I would also eventually live in Paris. So 1997, I had an 11-year-old daughter. I was working for an NBC station in San Francisco, KRON, and I said, it's time to go. Wow. And so I went. It wasn't easy, but I rented my house, sold a car, going to a very dynamic church, East Bay Church of Religious Science, and it just
know the church.
Moved me. I remember Reverend Eloise saying, each of us is sitting on $1 million idea. And if you have an idea, it was put in your mind by Spirit, by Father, Mother, God, for you to do. So I said, I want to go to France and do tours. I had planned to only stay there for a year. The fact that we are now celebrating our 20th anniversary amazes me every day. I was going to be a mother for a year. I'd been busy. I remember my daughter calling my mother, and she's like, Grandma, Mommy is cooking every day, and she's drinking wine, something I didn't do. But shortly after I got there, I had friends. In fact, 2 weeks after I got there, I had friends from my church who came to Paris, and they said, we know that there's a lot of history. We know you love history. I'm the one that would always take people to Allensworth. I love
with Ed Abram.
Yes, I love our history here in California. So I said, I've got to come up with some stuff for Paris. And I usually say, et voilà, which means, and there you go. But what was so powerful for me is that there is so much rich history of who we are in Paris. For instance, this year, 2018, we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of African Americans, some 350,000 men and some women coming to France to help the French win World War I. That same time, they also brought jazz with them. So we've got stories. Our tour focuses on that history, at least for this year. But we talk about so many other people. We talk about Alexandre Dumas, the general, not the writer. But how many people are aware that it was a black man, Alexandre Dumas, who was born in 1762, who would become one of the first prominent 4-star black generals in the French forces, leading some 155,000 French forces. And it was then his son, Alexandre Dumas, the writer, was born in 1802, who would write about his father's exploits. And so the son became famous. In fact, the son became noted as the most prolific writer in French history. He wrote more than 250 novels. We think Dan Brown is doing something, or J.K. Rowling? No. Alexandre Dumas, the author, wrote The Three Musketeers, The Count of Monte Cristo, The Man in the
He
Iron
wrote The
Mask.
Count of Monte Cristo?
Absolument. Don't you know it would be a black man, one for all and all for one?
Three Musketeers.
Three
Everyone
Musketeers.
knows about it.
Everyone
I was
knows.
enchanted by the story, the screen
Yes.
play of the Count.
But doesn't that make you proud when you know that that was a black man who wrote it? And
I
that
didn't see his name.
you didn't
But
see
maybe
Alexandre
it's
Dumas?
on the screen somewhere.
Oh yeah,
I
if it's
think
the
I
Three
have it.
Musketeers.
I'm going to go back
and
and
then
watch it.
his son. So there are three famous Dumas. It was the general, the
general?
father,
Yes.
then the son,
Son.
the writer, and then Alexandre Dumas, the writer, had a son, Alexandre Dumas. He was born in 1825.
The grandson was born in
The
1825?
grandson of the general was born in 1825. And this Alexandre Dumas would become noted as a very prominent playwright, an actor, dramatist, and he would be inducted into the Académie Française, which is being like, today would be like being a member of the Nobel Prize winning.
Wow.
Yes. So there were three prominent Dumas, so we talk about them. Our tour is a one-day event, we call it. It's a one-day experience. We have people who come over. Most of our guests who come over are independent travelers.
Yes.
So they want to come and just hang out with us for a day or two. We've just recently launched a Black Marseille tour. Marseille is on the southern coast, southern coast of France. It's along, we call it the poor people's Riviera. But Marseille, the first city in France, obviously the oldest city in France, and the most African city in France is Marseille. So we have guests who now have started going down to Marseille. We have a colleague who leads our Black Marseille tours. So we're having a good time.
Now, I'm in Paris. I'm going as an independent tourist.
Yes.
How do I hook up with Black Paris tours?
Well, we have guests who contact us anywhere from 2 to 3 years in advance. And they say, well, I'm coming, and I have some ladies who contacted me, they want to come in 2020. Or someone saying, I'm coming in 2019. Can you connect me to a travel agent? And there are noted African-American travel agents. I have to give a shout out to Kat St. Thomas, who is from the Bay Area. And Kat has been leading groups of African-Americans to France, to South Africa, to Brazil. She takes people everywhere, but she comes every year and she has her group take the Black Paris tour. There are different Black travel organizations now. There's a group called No Madness Travel Tribe. I love them. They're all these young, gifted, and Black professionals who travel everywhere around the world. And they're called No Madness because that's that concept of nomads.
Yes,
you travel.
but no madness.
But no madness, they named themselves that because when you travel with a consciousness of where you're going and who you are, there can be no madness. When you know that there are certain things that you must do wherever you go in the world.
Yes.
For instance, if you come to France, we teach our guests, our travelers, we call them. We teach our travelers that you have to get into that society. You just can't go somewhere and say, well, in the United States, it's like this. Yeah, well, you paid a whole bunch of money to go somewhere else. It's not going to be like that.
Yes, yes.
So certain little things we teach them. For instance, this is one in Europe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the way people learn how to count. So you should see the people who, oh my goodness. I'll say, okay, so when you go into a boulangerie or a pâtisserie where you go buy your pastries, if you say, I want 1, how many are you going to get? 2. because this is 1 and this is 2, 3, 4, 5. So just that little thing, I had one lady, she made me laugh. She says, oh my gosh, she says, baby, I went into a bakery and I told the lady I wanted 1, she gave me 2. She said, I cussed her out. You trying to take advantage of me because I'm American. The lady said, but you asked for 2. If you wanted 1, you would have done that. You see how small, little things?
Cultural differences.
Cultural difference. Another thing is we really have to teach our travelers that in France, people give the respect to each other. You're quiet on the buses, on mass transit, in the hotels, in the restaurants. You know, you don't laugh loud and talk loud. And some of our guests get into it immediately. That's the way you give respect to other people. So I'm really loud. I could light up this entire city. Mm-hmm. That's how loud I am. I've always been loud. But I've had to learn how to modulate my voice so that I use my inside voice.
Yes, I like that. I like that.
Yes.
Something spiritual about that.
I mean, just little things. My friends who live here, they get tired of me telling them about this, but it's just the way people are socialized. In France, even babies are taught not to cry on mass transit. Parents, you'll see fathers with the babies in the carriages.
Yes.
And if they're on a bus and the baby's crying, the father will shake the carriage and talk to the baby, engage with the baby. The baby continues crying. The people will look at the father like, what are you doing? Take that baby off the bus until you can calm that child. Or dogs. Funny, honestly, I'll never forget the first time I walked past the lady and she's got her dog and the dog barked at me. And the lady's like, oh, Madame, I'm so sorry. Why would my dog do that? And she fussed at the dog and the dog was like, oh, I'm really messed up. But the dogs are taught not to bark or jump up on people. How wonderful is it that I can walk anywhere I want to in the city, day or night, and not fear for my life?
Now, this is something in other European and Scandinavian countries. I found that.
Yes.
The only time I have really felt one with the universe was when I was in Copenhagen, Denmark.
Yes.
In the 60s, the police carried no guns. Mm-hmm. They had a little leather thing, maybe about this long, on their side. And we said, they must be joking. You know? But there was no fear present in the atmosphere.
Yes.
You were one with, for that brief window of time, you were one with all humanity.
Yes.
You feared nobody, nothing. And it's a marvelous feeling.
It is. And when you think in terms of all of the African Americans who have come to France and left legacy there. So when they see us, some of them, depending on how educated they are, and you know, the stories that have gone down, but when I have my travelers on buses and we do this tour, it's a walking public city bus tour.
Yes.
And very often the people will want to talk to them. They're like, oh, I had my father or my grandfather was in World War II, and where are you from? We want to talk to you. And it's different. It's very different. So Frederick Douglass came to Paris first in 1886.
Yes.
Or when you think about Ida Barnett Wells, one of the most dynamic women journalists to ever live, black women journalists, that she came to Paris in 1898, that Booker T. Washington came, that all of these great African Americans went to France and were greeted for the intellect, for the amazing people that they were, and not seen as first a thing.
Yes.
Now, I'm not going to absolve the French of any wrongdoing in the world.
No, you cannot do that.
They were involved in the enslavement of Africans.
Yes.
But they had a different attitude. The French, oh, well, I could go back to Louisiana Purchase. But the French, I don't know if it's the fact that the French and the Spanish were Catholic, but you had a soul. So they also, the other thing that makes a difference is that Africans were in the courts of the French kings long before there was a thing called enslavement. There were Africans in the royal court.
Yes.
Of the French kings. So they still can differentiate. So when you meet someone in France and you begin a conversation, they'll be like, well, where are your people from? And I can only go back to, well, we're from West Africa, but I don't know where. And they're like, that's too bad. Where your family from in the United States, and I talk about it. And then they will determine, okay, we like you or we don't like you. And it's not based on you are brown, therefore I hate you. Although the French do hate Algerians.
Well, there's that history.
The Civil War.
Algerian War.
They do not like Algerians.
And the Algerians made quite an impression.
Yes, they did. The Algerians defeated them, so they're like, okay, we don't like you. But they can't really tell if they're French or Africans.
They're not too crazy about Haitians either. But
they do have a problem with Haitians because the Haitians, thanks to Toussaint Overture, Henri Christophe, Boukman,
Boukman, who started it.
Yes, and a black woman who was also involved, unnamed black woman, that the Haitians would be the first to defeat the French, the British, and the Spanish. They hated them for that.
And haven't forgiven them to this
Exactly.
day.
The Haitians were paying reparations to the French until 1947.
Yeah.
Something like $1 trillion.
Say they owe
So when people ask, why is Haiti now called the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere? It's because the French ripped them off.
With assistance from other Western powers.
Yes.
But we won't go there, but they still have not forgiven them.
True.
Had it not been for Boukman, Christophe,
Henri Christophe.
and
Toussaint.
in Toussaint, we would be speaking French today. Because if they hadn't stopped Napoleon, he was going to go on and defeat what is now the United States.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's why Thomas Jefferson sold Louisiana.
Generals. And so we owe a lot to them. We don't realize that.
Yes.
But study your history.
Yeah. Yes.
But he stopped them.
Yes, he
Toussaint.
did. So all of this, plus I talk about a man, his birth name was Joseph Bologna, but he would eventually be knighted by the king.
Give me his name again.
His name was Joseph Bologna. He was born in 1745, and he was born in Guadeloupe, a French colony. His father was a French aristocrat. His mother had been enslaved and was brought out of slavery by her French husband, brought to the, I started to say United States. She was brought to France, and his father sent him to the finest schools. He would become a major fencer, championship fencer. He was an equestrian. And eventually, he would become noted as one of the founders of European classical music. And he would be knighted and named Chevalier de Saint-Georges. Chevalier de Saint-Georges, who would be credited with the creation of European classical music, a black man.
The name, I hadn't associated him.
Chevalier de Saint-Georges.
Within African. I had not associated him.
So for your
the
guests,
name I know.
If they are curious about any of these people that we're talking about, they can go on the Black Paris Tour website. It's www.blackparistour, no S at the end. And you'll see all of these people. You'll see images of all of the people that we're talking about.
I'm going to do that myself.
I look forward to it. We have a wonderful website with the help of Jennifer Burke in Atlanta, who's put together our website. And there are documentaries. There's a documentary about Josephine Baker. There's an 8-minute mini documentary on James Reese Europe and the 369th Harlem Hellfighters.
Yes,
These are the
yes,
men
yeah.
who would leave their mark in France during World War I. They were on the battlefront for 191 days, longer than any other regiment.
And got more of the French highest, their Medal of Honor.
They received the Légion d'honneur avec palme, which is the highest military award the French
Yes.
government has to give.
Yes.
There was a black man named Eugene Jacques Bullard who was a pilot for the French, not the Americans. He was a pilot for the French during World War I. This black fighter pilot. And you know how we do. I call him the Michael Jordan of piloting. He didn't just fly, he flew. And the Germans called him the Black Bastard. He was so powerful. He scared them. He had this ability. He would fly under him and then loop around and come back and knock him out of the sky. Eugene Jacques Bullard. When I was about 5 or 6, my mother and I were watching the Today Show, and he was in New York. He had been honored by President Charles de Gaulle, who had come from France.
Now, when was this?
This must have been in the
60s.
1959, 1960.
Early 60s, yes.
And Eugene Jacques Bullard was honored and given more medals by General de Gaulle as General de Gaulle came over. He was living in Harlem. This man, who was a fighter pilot, one of the baddest pilots the French had, black American. He was from Columbus, Georgia, but he was also the owner of several nightclubs. He had been a boxer. He'd been influenced by Jack Johnson. He was a protege of Jack Johnson. And actually, he was probably, I call him the black godfather of Black Paris community. And when he returned to the United States, the best job he could get in Harlem, this man living in Harlem, was as an elevator operator at Rockefeller Center.
And that was an honor.
Well, it was a good job, they said. So this pilot is now driving or controlling elevators in Rockefeller Center. Isn't that amazing?
It's shameful. It's interesting that he did not stay in Paris.
He tried. In fact, he stayed between World War I, when the war ended in 1918, and then he became, as I said, first he started out as a musician, then he owned several nightclubs. He would hire Langston Hughes for his first job. Langston Hughes, the writer.
Yes.
He hired Langston Hughes for his first job.
He went to Paris along with other writers.
Exactly. He hired Ada Bricktop Smith. Everybody has heard of Bricktop. And he hired her to come and work in his nightclub. And I mean, this man who was so accomplished, when World War II began, Eugene Jacques Bullard would become a spy for the French resistance.
Wow.
He had learned to speak German. And so the Germans, even though they said they hated jungle music, which is what they called African-American jazz, they still loved it on the down low. So they would go quietly to his club and they would talk, and he understood what they were saying, and he would become a major spy, as was Josephine Baker, a spy for the French resistance.
I didn't know that about Josephine Baker.
Yes.
But I'm going to study. What I really would like to do, I want to finish up on this history that we are talking about. And you know, one of the other hosts, and I hope she doesn't beat me to it. And then I want to talk some more about Black Paris Tour. because I understand that one of my colleagues coming on right after we finish this show has been on that tour with you. Maybe the three of us on another show can get together, but I definitely want to continue this after I have had an opportunity to go on your website, the Black Paris Tour
I would welcome that.
website. And then I want to come back and talk about some of these legends.
Yes.
I hope you have found this as intriguing as I have, and that you will stay tuned for part 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. May become weekly, because I'm a history buff, a student of history, so I have enjoyed this thoroughly.
Oh, merci, monsieur. Je suis très content.
Mercy. And until next time, I am your host, Reverend Robert L. McKnight, thanking my guest, Miss Ricky Stevenson of the Black Paris Tours, for sharing with us. And so until next time, we'll see you then.